Hi, this is Shadi Atia, professor at Liège University in Belgium, and today's presentation is entitled Survey Design Questionnaire as part of observational research. Well, today's presentation is part of a playlist on observational research. I hope you watch previous videos to better understand today's presentation. I need to remind you that we are here in the observational research family where we are using non-manipulative research settings, and we are distinguished this methodology among the 4 or 5 other research families. The objective of today's presentation is mainly to enhance your capacity to conceptualize and design the questionnaire, and we will go through the different aspects of developing a survey questionnaire for your research. We are looking at the domain identification, the survey development, the question and scaling, how to test your survey, how to launch your survey, and how to perform a factorial analysis or a factor analysis to make sure that your survey is valid and reliable. Before some takeaway messages. So let's start with the introduction. As we know that observational research is looking at describing and testing, and therefore we use large number of units or large number of subjects, and we need to use also large number of variables that we are observing in order to conduct our observational research. Well, what is the nature of a survey in general? It is something that has a large number of observations. It has an extensive data generation. It is involving collecting of the data through questionnaires. It looks more for the breadth than the depth. It is based on random sampling, so to avoid any type of bias. It looks at relationships between the different variables. It looks at the remote closed data generation. It requires quantitative data for sure in order to conduct the analysis and perform statistical analysis. Now, when we look at survey types, there is 2 main survey types. We call the survey types of questionnaires or about interviews. In this lecture, I'm going to talk about questionnaires, but if you are interested in survey types within the observational research for interview types, I invite you to watch the following video on the survey design for interviews. Now, as you can see in the questionnaire type of surveys, we can have hard copies or virtual copies, meaning that we can conduct them either online or through surveys, smartphones or tablets or other devices, or we can do them with paper in general. Now, when we look at the different survey types, actually what is a survey questionnaire? It is the collection of quantitative data through structured questioning. So we are looking here at primary data, and it is a suitable strategy when the research objective is to describe a problem or situation or to test certain theory. It requires a large number of variables and large number of respondents, like we said before, and it enables you to generalize the research outcome to a broader context, which contributes to the external validity and to the generalization aspect. Now, one of the most important steps to start when you design your questionnaire or your form of your questionnaire, you need to define the domain of your research. Well, what are the questionnaire domains? Well, actually, it is the process of identification of research domains which involve the structure and the synthesis of the existing scholarly concepts based on the theoretical framework and research variables. So, if you remember the lecture about operationalization, when we will define your questionnaire, it needs to respond to variables and concepts that you are already defined in your research operationalization step. So therefore, it needs to be based on a literature review and based on your theoretical framework. And it is essentially standing on your operationalization step where you define the research indicators and the research variables. So the domain identification is important because here you will do a validation of the research domains through your pilot study or your questionnaire responses, and then you are ready for developing your questionnaire based on these domains that you have defined, and the questionnaire will respond to these domains that you want to investigate or inquire about, or let's say those variables or those indicators that you want to measure in your questionnaire. Now, it's very important when you're developing your survey is to look at the role of language. The wording is so important because language influences the response formation process in surveys. And in many cases, you need to use the local or the mother tongue in order to get a good response of a questionnaire. So the survey data are meaningless if respondents do not understand the survey question as intended by the researcher. So it's a matter of comprehension, it's a matter of interpretation. And here comes the sensitivity of using questionnaires, that they require a lot of effort to create them, a lot of effort to develop them, to make sure that the people who will use them understand what you mean as a researcher. Coming out of the blue in a very short time, developing your questionnaire and thinking that will be the first shot, it is not the way to do a proper questionnaire. So when we look at differential context dependency, so it looks at the differential context dependency that can have consequences for question interpretation. It's very sensitive to the culture. A questionnaire can hardly be generalized worldwide unless we are talking about very common global phenomena. But when we're talking about very specific, context-specific phenomena that we're trying to measure, the culture will play a role and the context will play a role. So the question target may be very different if the concept exists in the language or not, and therefore when you conduct the coding later on for your questioning results, you might have challenges or difficulties. So depending on the language, respondent may answer the same question differently as a result. So maybe they interpret the question differently, they have a different mental representation of the question target. You might have a mismatch between the language of encoding and the language of the recall. You might have different accessible information at the time of the survey request, or different anchoring of the response scales, or you can have different self-presentation concerns. So it's very important to assign a language expert to revise your survey and take the proper time to doing that. And it's not only a language expert that you need to assign to check that the wording and the language you are using corresponds to the terms and the concept that you want to measure, but also you need to have a thematic tech expert in the field and a statistical expert in the field who can assure that when these responses are translated, they will form a useful data set that can be later on processed in order to establish correlation or conduct description tests or variance tests. Now, the next step when we are formulating our questionnaire or our survey questionnaire in observational research is to look at the survey development. Well, the identified domains have to be translated into sections. So if you have different domains for your research, you need to translate them into sections of your survey. And then in the survey, each section will have items that measure specific variables. So you have certain domains associated with items. So you start with the introduction. In the introduction, you can give information about the ethical concern, about the consent, about the institution, about the place, about the responsible contact person. Then you can come up with personal data section. So first start introduction about the consent, then personal data. Then you need to avoid asking a respondent to write any information in the beginning. Use tick boxes or multiple choices. Avoid open-ended questions because we are not doing here a qualitative research. We are doing quantitative research. And use the target group language. So this is very important. Then the questionnaire introduction is important because it will outline the pertinent information about the survey, and the introduction should provide the title or the subject of the survey, identify the sponsor, explain the purpose of the survey, request the respondents' cooperation. You need to call them, ask them for that explicitly and directly, inform the respondents about confidentiality concerns or issues, specify whether the survey is voluntary or mandatory, and state whether there is any data sharing agreement with other organizations. For example, how you will comply with GDPR, with the general rules of privacy, that is the directive of the European Union, for example. There is a video about it, how you will handle ethical concerns, and so on. Now, what are the types of questionnaires we could have? We can have dichotomous response format, where you have a question to which the test taker was expected to give a short answer. Possibly 1 or 2 words would be adequate for an appropriate answer. We can have level measurement questions, where we have a numbering system used and an interval level response format. The most common is the Likert scaling, and this is the most common type of questions that is used, because we will have a bipolar approach of scaling, and we will have semantic differential scales, and we will use the Gottman scale. So the level measurement questions are the most common in survey questionnaires. And then we can have also another type, which is the filter or the contingency questions, which allow you to break out the questionnaire to what if scenarios. If people have certain preferences, you complement or add additional questions. So here, based on the answer of the question, a subsequent part of your questionnaire will follow on. So those are the three questionnaire types that you need to design or take into account. Now start with an introduction section. Define the aim, the principal investigator, the context, the sponsor, the time needed to do this survey and this questionnaire, and if there is a reward or not. Preferably there is a reward. Explain how to fill the questionnaire. A reward, by the way, could be financial, but sometimes a reward could be that you confirm that people will get access to the data or to the survey results. Number two, explain how to fill up the questionnaire. Make sure to have some short explanation. Cite all standards or any ethical rules that were used in compliance, the European rules, the national rules, or whatever. Ensure anonymity and confidentiality. For example, mention the GDPR, and start to design your survey based on that. Like I told you, also one of the questions you need to answer here, are you going to have a hard copy or a digital copy? It depends on the context, on the settings. Sometimes if you are with a large sample and you are in field with people, hard copy work very good. In other contexts, online, if the survey takes time or you want to have a wider spread or a very large sample, then online would be better. And make sure that you are defining this aspect before moving to the following step of your questionnaire, which will be the questions and the scaling. So let's start with questionnaire and scaling. Use a questionnaire form with data fields and responses that are pre-coded based on the data types. So actually you need to define first from your responses and your questionnaire design. Are you going to collect nominal data or ordinal data or interval data or ratio data? And we explained that in previous videos if you want to further detail, but it's very important to start with this step. And after defining your data type, you need to check if your questionnaire design will be closed or open. In most of the case, we advise to have closed questionnaire types, meaning that people can select only one specific answer. So here comes the very famous multiple choice questions, or the Likert scale questions, or the checkbox questions. And as I told you, I recommend strongly to use the Likert scale questions because they are the types of questions that will allow later on for statistical analysis. But this does not mean that there is dichotomous questions, rating scale questions, matrix questions, drop-down questions, open-ended questions, and ranking questions. Those are other types of questions that you can use, but still I strongly advise to use the Likert scale questions because they are the best way to generate a data set that can later on be treated and processed for statistical analysis. And this is a very important example. I advise you to focus here because here we need to define a questionnaire and we will define the interval scales. So my advice to you is to use 5-level Likert scale, or even better if you can, a 7-level Likert scale as continuous variable. This is very important. So make sure that you have used a 7 or in the worst case a 5-level Likert scale when you design a question, and make sure that you use semantic scales that are bipolar. So use adjectives that at the end of the points of each scale. So don't do like this example. Here you can see that the researcher defined 5 different scales, and for each scale they defined a semantic. This is not recommended at all. What is actually recommended is to have 5 Likert scales and just mention the extreme to have it bipolar adjective. On the one side you say, for example, very poor, and on the other side you say excellent. And you keep the spaces in between without any semantic scale description. And for sure, if better and better, instead of having 5 Likert scale levels, to have 7. So this is one of the important advices when you define or design your questionnaire. When we talk about the 5-level Likert itemized scale, here we are looking at itemized rating scales that are used to help the research obtain a measure of attitudes. So this is very important, and it allows you to having interval data that scores that can assist in the analysis of responses. So most likely to be from 1 to 5 or 1 to 7 from least to most positive, or from -2 to 2, from the most negative to the most positive, with a neutral point as 0. So therefore, I advise to use the 5 or the 7, because then you have this neutrality in the middle. Now let's move to the second step of your questionnaire development. You need to test it, and you need to do a pilot testing. This is part of the development of the questionnaire. This is not part of the beginning of your field work, and it's not part of the data collection process. It's part of the developing of your questionnaire. So survey questioning or the survey testing requires pilot study or pre-test, and here we try to have the testing of the effect of my study size on the reliability of my outcomes. So test how people respond to the survey, design whether your question will generate useful results or not, and here you can start to test some statistical tests. The pilot test is a mini survey that must measure the time, the clarity, and identify any missing items in your survey. It will allow you to get diverse reviewers' ideas, feedback, expert opinion, how they perceived the questions, and it will allow you to detect linguistic mistakes. So therefore, you need to run it several times with your population or sample of your target population. You need to test it with the linguistic expert, you need to test it with the thematic expert, you need to test it with representative respondent until you are sure that you are reached a certain quality. And the pre-testing requires purpose validity, content validity, and criterion validity. Now, also part of the survey testing is to do a pilot testing. Here you are looking at the description or descriptive statistics. You can directly run some descriptive statistics, looking at the mean, the max, the min, and so on. You can also check with Cronbach alpha test the reliability of your questionnaire. You can have some exploratory factor analysis very fast, and you can have some confirmatory factor analysis even in the pilot testing. So these are all kind of ways to come early on with any surprises and reformulate and retweak your survey question results based on these statistical tests, because if you have insufficient results or unacceptable results, you will directly start to reformulate your questionnaire to make sure that you will have a meaningful and workable data set later on with the data analysis before starting your data collection campaign. So in this step of your pre-testing, I advise you to use this checklist. Well, you need to answer the following questions. Are respondents willing to answer questions in the way you have asked them or formulated them? Are any of the questions particularly difficult to answer, or do people skip it, or does it address sensitive information? Are the questions well understood by the respondents? Can the interviewers follow the instructions easily, or they are misinterpreted by them? Is the questionnaire designed with adequate space, and is the coding of the answer clear or not? Is it necessary to create new codes for common answers which were not included in the original questionnaire? And for sure, how long does the interview take? You need to test the duration of your interview, of your survey, and in your introduction section of the survey, you mention this questionnaire will require in average, let's say, 7 minutes, ideally 10 minutes maximum of time. This could be done based on your pilot study. So this is very important because people will not invest if you exceed 12 minutes. This is the longest possible to have a high response rate above 300 respondents without financial compensation for sure. Now, my advice is, in general, for your questions is avoid asking too many questions, keep it short, avoid survey fatigue. There is something called survey fatigue. Some people bombard people with open-ended questions, a lot of number of questions. Make sure to reduce your survey dropout rate. Make it a short survey. If you are in the 20 minutes range, it's already exhausting. I advise you under the 12 minutes rate. Ensure high data quality. Frame varying questions to suit the research. Make sure that you are only focusing on the variables that are relevant to your study based on the itemization of your domain. And based on that, you can now only launch your survey. Now let's talk about launching your survey. You will need to have a recruitment and launching strategy. You need to define your sampling framework, your population sample, map them, check their engagement potential, check for some field preparation, what you will need to do, look at your training, your field, your team, in order to be ready for collecting the data and for launching the survey. Choose and prepare the equipments necessary for your questionnaire survey. Carry out the pilot study with those launching conditions so that you are having the ideal conditions. Now, the last part of today's presentation will focus on the factor analysis, and the factor analysis will be the statistical test that you will perform in order to start analyzing the result of your survey. Make sure that you understand that you will use a series of statistical tests that correspond to the following. Some of the tests will correspond to the domain retention. Domain retention means that are questions that are questions to question the correlation of your work, and here you use the Pearson coefficient to check that there is a real association between the items and the domains of your research questionnaires. Sometimes we formulate a questionnaire with certain concepts, certain domains, and sub-items and questions, and we discover that there is no correlation. People are not answering, and the answers are all not establishing any correlation or any variance, meaning that I didn't ask the right questions, or maybe this phenomena is not appropriately operationalized. So before scaling up your questionnaire and starting your field work, you need to do statistical tests to check the correlation between your items and your domains, and establish this correlation, and you make sure that there is a strength of the association between these items. Second type of factor analysis test that needs to be done, you need to test the reliability of your survey. So you need to do repeatability between the submissions. Repeat, try to do pilot testing at least for 15, 20, 25 person. Internal consistency needs to be measured using the Cronbach alpha indicator for the domain items. And for sure, the third aspect to take into account is to measure the validity. So you need to start to run some linear regression models to check the confirmatory factor analysis, and you can use the Kruskal-Wallis test, which is very suitable in this case. Now, I'm not talking about factor analysis to be done after that you're done with your field test. I'm talking to perform all these analyses already during the pilot testing phase in order to kind of prepare yourself for the step when the field measurements are done and the whole campaign is done. You make sure that the success rate is high and the potential of success is high. Well, this is the end of today's presentation. Some takeaway messages before leaving. Well, today we were talking about how to design a survey in the form of a questionnaire. My advice here is to design the survey methodology and tools in consultation with a survey expert and comply to the checklist that I provided in this lecture. Don't forget, when I'm talking about survey expert, I'm looking at a linguistic expert, and I'm looking at a thematic field expert, and I'm looking at a statistical expert. So three experts need to be involved. Define and validate the domains based on the literature and with the help of linguistic specialists for wording. You need to become a true theoretical expert to design the best possible questionnaire, meaning that if you're doing a questionnaire for the first time, second, third time, most probably your questionnaire will be very weak, and you need to understand that. So don't developing a master or PhD thesis or dissertation and think that by doing first time in your life a questionnaire, it will be a good questionnaire. Meaning that by default it will be a very weak questionnaire, and the only way is to up the game and make it to the level expected is to consult on the level of language, on the level of expertise of the theme and understanding of the topic, and consult on the level of statistical treatment and the formulation of your questions. So it's very important to take this into account, and this is a very important takeaway message. Make sure to keep the study period short and your questionnaire short, and define the type of collected data, the sampling type, the composition, and the instrument needed in order to conduct your survey. Well, this is the end of today's presentation. It was part of a playlist on observation research. I invite you to follow future videos and the next videos in order to go and succeed with your observation research analysis. Well, thank you very much for your attention. Today's presentation was about the survey design of questionnaires within the playlist on observation research. Thank you.